Twig 2. The mask floated around me, laughing at me as it glided through the air, even blurring, even seemingly multiplying under the weight of my fever. I did my best to just ignore it, already absently chewing another block, until I saw a woman's hands pluck it gently out of thin air. Its cackling quieted slightly in my mother's hands. "Taura, do you like masks?" she gently asked. It took a while for the question to reach me in my delirium. Masks. Do I like masks? Then she was probably asking more if it was because I liked masks that I kept making them. In that case, hell no. Masks were something that was tied into being a parahuman, into being a cape, so intrinsically as to be almost inseparable. It was to the point that when Gwenye ripped out a parahuman soul, or whatever, those souls had their costumes instead of their skin, and wore their masks instead of their human faces. Among parahumans, it was even to the point that anyone who didn't wear a mask was considered some kind of dangerous freak, the type of people who didn't follow or play by the rules. I'd become one of those by the end, sort of. Maybe even doubly so, in a way. I'd been unmasked against my will by Dragon and Defiant, revealed in front of an entire school and the whole world as Taylor Hebert. And yet, in an odd kind of way, when the mask had come off, all that had been left to me was being Skitter, until I turned myself in. Even then, though everyone had known who I was underneath the mask, ironically, I'd just become Weaver. There still hadn't been any room left for me to be Taylor. What was I supposed to do? Go home? Hang out with my friends? None of that was an option for me then. I'd been at work or in prison. But in the end, during the final battle, I'd taken my mask off at some point too. I couldn't tell you why I'd done it, except maybe in hopes of being more than a mask by the end. To fight and win and maybe even die as myself, even if that meant being a madwoman and monster. Maybe I'd even succeeded. So no, I didn't like masks. I didn't like the lie, the secrets, the associations. How a mask could replace the face underneath it so thoroughly that even once the mask came off, the person beneath still seemed to be gone. Didn't like how, even now, if someone could rip my soul out of his baby's body and truly see me for who I was, I still wasn't sure what face they'd see. But, on the other hand, if you asked me, how many nights have you spent working on carefully crafting masks, wondering all the while what those masks meant and where they stopped and the faces beneath it began? Then the answer was probably in the general vicinity of 500 to 600, as I'd built costumes for most of the Protectorate out of spider silk, and worked into the night while wondering over every design. It was something that lingered in my thoughts, that I carried and took with me. Even now, as a baby, I wore masks and considered them. Why people wore them, why people feel like they need to wear them, and what the point of wearing them even is. Every ninja and Konoha can shapeshift, but the Embu choose to wear masks, while most of the others showed their faces and wore their loyalties on their foreheads. It made me wonder what it meant to them, to wear a mask or not, in this world of shinobi where faces could mean nothing. The ones I'd made for father and grandfather had been good luck charms, but maybe even that was telling. That a part of me thought that if they were going to battle, it was only right that they should wear something like a mask. So, maybe my mother was on the right track. Masks had been my drug of choice since long before I died, unpleasant and bad for me as they might have been. It was only the literal, rather than metaphorical, craving that was new. "I wonder if you get it from me," my mother continued. Had I answered? What had I said? I didn't remember. I used to be a sheet a long time ago. A sheet? A performer in the North Theatre. Had I known that? My thoughts were blending together into a thick stew and slipping away. Oh yes, I inherited some old masks made by Sankubo, a famous mask maker from Ujoshiakakure, so it seemed only right for me to try, she said. It's not hard to find a basic mask, but true no masks are hard to come by, especially now that Uzashio is gone. They tend to be family heirlooms because they take a lot of time and skill to make. Just having one can get you through the door of a famous theatre troupe and draw some attention to you. Sadly, with my skill, I think that was the only reason they let me through the door, and so I left on my own eventually. I still have that mask in storage somewhere though. It was my mother's once, before she passed it on to me. I wondered what kind of mask it was, despite myself. You have another sign of crippling mask addiction. It was called the Dagon mask. My mother said it might even have been the first. My mother said she had it made for her role in the play Aoi no Ue, about the first wife of Genji. Genji is... well, I'll tell you when you're older. But in the play, Lady Aoi gets possessed by a spirit during childbirth and falls ill, and the culprit turns out to be the spirit of Genji's former lover, Lady Rokujo, and then things go rather bad for her. Oh, but the mask is so beautiful. The reason it's called Dagon is because it's literally gilded. It has golden eyes as well as teeth. In No, when the eyes and teeth change like that, it represents the beginning of a supernatural transformation, you see. The mask for Lady Rokujo shows the progression of her transformation into an evil spirit, wearing a Hanya mask. Hanya? It was a word I'd heard in passing before, but not one that made sense to me in this context. The direct translation was something like wisdom. My mother hummed for a while, perhaps considering where to continue, and rocked me gently in her lap as she did so. I didn't remember her putting me in her lap or how long I'd been there, but after a while she continued, probably realizing that keeping the details of a bloody or mature play from me because of my age was rather pointless, when I was routinely exposed to people talking about how to most effectively kill people anyway. It's said that when a woman is hurt enough, she'll turn into a monster, an onryo. In the plays, her eyes and teeth turn gold and then her face turns red, and then she grows golden horns as well. In the end, the woman will turn into a serpent or a dragon, to vent her rage on those who hurt her. My mother said, chuckling quietly. And to wear the masks properly, it said you have to resonate with those feelings too. Did you know there's a special word used for wearing a no mask? It's not kaburu for putting on clothes. It's tsukeru for attaching. You're supposed to retreat alone to a mirror room and face the mask before wearing it, becoming one with it too. Unless the character you're playing is alive, in which case you're not supposed to wear a mask at all, or else... Wow. I hate it. It felt familiar and right, and I hated it. As if reading my mind, the mask in my mother's hand chittered at me, and I closed my eyes so I wouldn't have to look at it. Dear, my father's voice murmured, you'll scare her. Hardly, my mother replies blithely, and I felt her brush her fingers over my face. It takes more than that to scare our daughter. She wasn't even scared of the demon fox. Closing my eyes proved to be my undoing though. I'd only thought to close them for a little while, but when I opened them again, the sun was setting. My mother was gone, off somewhere else in the house, and my father was holding me, sitting on the porch and looking out over the slowly falling snow. The mask from before was gone, but I was taken by an urge to chew something into the shape of another. I wondered if this was what cigarette cravings felt like. I didn't like the masks, didn't even want to see them, but not having a wooden block to chew on was making me anxious. It's not strange for jutsu to be influenced by their user, my father murmured, noticing my eyes open. Or for them to take on shapes that matter to their user more than the defaults. Often the explanation for this is just that certain things felt right. I'm not an expert on such things, but in a way that always made sense to me. Our chakra is the mixture of our body and spirit after all, and so, if half of our chakra is born from our spirit, then it makes sense that things that resonate with that spirit should have some sway, doesn't it? I closed my eyes again, but then thought to open them up again, and considered it before slowly nodding. The same goes for a shinobi's intuition, he continued then. Your grandfather always told me that if I've ever got a strange feeling, if it ever seems like something was wrong, it's my chakra trying to tell me something. But doesn't that really mean that I'm trying to tell myself something, and my chakra is simply amplifying that feeling? So whenever I get a feeling like that, I tell myself to stop and look back, and try to realize what it is that's put me on edge. For you, it could be the same. He might be right, I mused, realizing I hadn't considered that angle, though maybe not in quite the way he was thinking. For better or worse, I'd spent years dealing with and accepting that sometimes my power just did stuff, because it quite literally had a mind of its own. But my father was right. In theory, my chakra was just a part of me, and shouldn't do anything that didn't, on some level, make sense to me. Considering that, I thought about what I was doing, trying to figure out what could be the cause, and the only thing I could think of was my frequent use of Higanbana. The reason I'd been so desperate to learn Yin Release, to the point of pushing myself to near death for it, was to compensate for the tiny amount of physical energy I had, which had been the limiting factor in my attempts to use chakra. As long as I could lean on my mental and spiritual energy, though, I figured I'd be fine. But after the QB and what I'd done against him, I suddenly found myself overflowing with chakra, yet I was still using most of it as Yin chakra to continue to support my Higanbana. Meaning, what? That I was leaving behind a large mass of very Yang-aligned chakra now as leftovers? Or a large amount of unbalanced physical energy? In theory, that was a power the Abarame were already well suited for, but why did it matter? Right now it was almost like my body was trying to push it out. Maybe it was. I knew there was a species of insects held by the Abarame that was naturally very Yang-aligned. An incredibly fast-growing species that had to be held tightly in check or there'd be disastrous results. Maybe on some level, I'd realized that leaving a massive amount of growth serum next to my already almost out-of-control swarm might be a bad idea. That would explain why I felt tense and worried whenever I didn't have a chance to spit up some masks at least. And Yang chakra was said to give life to things that had none, so that might explain why the masks came alive and started floating around me too. But what it didn't explain was why they seemed to hate and mock me, laughing and floating around me like I was being haunted. I wasn't haunted by anything. From a distance, buried in the ground outside our home, I heard muffled laughter. In my feverish days, I'd heard people in the clan who'd seen the mask before they could be disposed of murmur that I was cursed by the QB for what my grandfather had done, though my father and grandfather had silenced those rumors quickly. Maybe that was why. The QB's rage burned so hot it practically set its chakra ablaze, and some of it was in me now. It could be the cause, though the first masks I'd made were before I'd faced the QB. If not that, then I'll have to leave soon, my father said, regret filling his voice, and I pushed away my thoughts to give him my full attention. I didn't want to tell you until I thought you'd understand. It took a while to gather my thoughts and put them into words. Why? I finally rasped. With Konoha weakened, it's all the more important that we prove to everyone that we aren't weakened, my father said, not seeming bothered by the obvious contradiction, and damn it, but I understood that too. Slowly I put together bits and pieces I'd seen in passing, fishing them from the muck of fever. My father seemed grateful to have been granted enough of a reprieve to be sure his wife and children were okay, but as the new head of the clan, he apparently had to make his presence known too. Given that things were still in flux months later, he'd be running missions for a while if I had to guess. I thought about asking him to teach me something before he left, suddenly worried. I didn't know the specifics of Konoha's political relationship with the other villagers right now, but I knew the generalities, and I knew enough about appearances and why they needed to be upheld to know that if Konoha was worried enough to deploy the bulk of their shinobi after the attack, then they were also worried about being attacked again if anyone realized they were weaker than they were trying to seem. That meant that there was a real risk of being attacked and, well, it might have been arrogant to think, but I was worried it was true regardless. With my grandfather retired by his injuries and most of the clan away running missions, I might soon be the strongest member of the clan left in Konoha. If another village launched a surprise attack and managed to breach the village's walls, I might well be the only thing protecting my family. Which was a rather terrifying thought, if I was being honest with myself. Against a target that didn't know I was there and so didn't try to target me or put up any real defense against me, my range and the arrays of bugs at my disposal make me a threat to a whole bunch of people that should be far outside my weight class. But if a group of random shinobi broke into the Abarame clan with the intention of killing everyone in sight, and even a basic grasp of the clan's capabilities, I wasn't sure how much I'd be able to do about it before I was killed just from the collateral damage. If I figured out what was happening ahead of time, I might be able to make sure the attackers died with me. But if they got far enough to lay their eyes on me, or else just skip to destroying the house, I wasn't entirely sure what I'd do about it. Realistically, it shouldn't take a grown shinobi more than a second to kill a baby, and it wasn't as though I'd be able to run away. But my father and grandfather didn't seem especially eager to resume my training after my brush with death, and I wasn't in any condition to try and impress either. I had my hands full just maintaining my health and my swarms. Right now, most of my training time consisted of spending as much time as I could stand compressing my Higanbana to its limits and focusing on myself, and the rest was spent trying to re-establish the devastated insect population in the village. I didn't have the time or energy to do much else. Even if my father had been willing to teach me something dangerous enough to be useful, I wasn't entirely sure I could spare the time for it right now. So the best thing for me to do to prepare was probably what I was already doing, uncomfortable a thought as that was. I wasn't good at accepting that there wasn't much I could do. My father just put a hand on my head, probably trying to put me at ease, but maybe to check my temperature. "Don't worry," he says. "This time, it's my turn to keep our family safe. I'll make sure nothing bad happens. Everything will be alright." I wanted to believe him, but I wasn't sure if I could, primarily because I wasn't sure he believed that. The village had just lost the Hokage it had apparently pinned its hopes and dreams on, and had been badly damaged in the process, while the grudges of the Third War were probably fresh in a lot of minds. From what I'd heard on the street, the fourth Hokage had literally decimated Iwa, a tenth of its shinobi dead at the hands of a single man, and they'd been forced to sue for peace once it became clear the fourth was going to kill as many shinobi as they put in front of him. But if word got out that the boogeyman was dead and Konoha looked vulnerable, they might weigh their odds against the mountain of corpses they'd had to bury. Hell, the fact that the village wanted my father taking missions just a month or two after his entire immediate family had been put in the hospital meant the odds of other villages attacking must have been pretty serious. What, your son was born 4 or 5 months early? Your daughter nearly melted into a pile of hate and bug goo? Your wife had a miscarriage and your father was crippled for life? Okay, fine, you can have a month off, but then we need you back in the field. That didn't imply to me that everyone were confident that things would be alright. I made a note to myself to use my Higanbana to start snooping around, once I recovered enough. If nothing else, there was a ninja academy I could learn things from spying on, right? "But it'll be your birthday soon," my father continued, sounding sad. "I might miss it." Hearing that confused me enough that, for a moment, I set my worries aside. "Oh, right. My birthday's coming up," I thought, realizing it was almost that time. I hadn't thought much about it at all, but I'd been born towards the end of January. The 23rd, probably. Counting my past life, it had been about 3 years since I'd actually celebrated my birthday, and 4 or 5 years since I'd had any reason to celebrate. Other people had remembered, occasionally, before or after the fact, and I'd gotten gifts now and then, but I'd forgotten about my 16th birthday because of Slaughterhouse 9 attacked, and Jack and Cyan had made sure my 18th wasn't a priority either, and the other 2 I'd spent in jail, far from my friends. At some point, the idea of my birthday being something to celebrate had fallen to the wayside, and so I hadn't given much thought to my birthday in this world either. But I guess my family probably would consider it important, especially given how hard getting through my first year had ended up being. On birthdays, we give gifts to the ones we love. he explained, as if realizing belatedly that I might not know. Your mother's preparing something already, but is there anything you would like from me? Then, while you're out, can you collect some new bugs for me? I asked after a moment's thought. The thought of asking for a powerful new jutsu rose in my mind again, and then died for the same reasons as before. And aside from that, I had enough books to read for now, and there was nothing else I really wanted. Of course, my father said at once, because in our family it was a natural request. Anything in particular? I was a bit surprised he didn't immediately specify some conditions. But then again, I suppose that in his eyes, I already had access to the most deadly insects he was aware of, namely all the bugs in the clan's possession. And the thing is, that was true. So despite my worries for the future, I couldn't really think of anything that would massively, immediately improve my odds if a war broke out. I'm sure there were plenty of non-insects that would be useful to have, but I didn't know enough about the hidden species of this world to know which ones to ask for, much less what my dad was likely to come across. After a moment, despite my concerns, I decided to set my sights elsewhere. Enji Mushi or Shiku, please, I said, using this land's name for congenial and lac insects. Or any spiders with strong webs. I don't know as much about arachnids as I do insects, but I'll try to find what I can, my father said before furrowing his brow. But Enji, Mushi, and Shiku, I know where to find them, but can I ask why? I heard they can be used to make dyes, I said honestly. Ah, that. Certainly they can be, he mused, seemingly a bit surprised as he trailed off. I want to see if I can do anything with that, I said, which was also true. Theoretically, there was also a species of sea snail that was used to make Tyrian purple, though I didn't know if they existed in this world or not, and I'd heard of some shellfish that produced something similar. But while I could control some types of mollusks, it wouldn't really matter if I wasn't anywhere near the sea. For what I wanted, I didn't need an aquarium. I needed a breeding population. And as is, I didn't really care which species I had access to, so long as I had one. Though, as for exactly what I wanted to accomplish, even I wasn't sure. I just wanted to know if the addition of chakra-infused dye would improve the quality of my silk. If I couldn't do anything else right now, I at least wanted to do everything I could to protect my family. Shiku can be found easy enough, but Enji Mushi feed off a type of cactus. If my missions take me through Suna, I should be able to find some, but it might be hard to raise them here. He mused. I did my best to tiredly nod and felt my eyes grow heavy again, as if the effort of thinking so much had drained me. Before I drifted off entirely though, I felt his fingers touch my face. I'll try to be back soon, Taura. The rest of the winter passed in a blur of disconnected moments, clear fragments occasionally rising out of the fog and muck of fever. Sometimes, days would pass without leaving any impression on me, or things would be so blurry they might as well not have happened. Only a few things seemed to leave any impact on me most days. Actions, moments, or words that somehow stood out from the rest, at once disconnected from anything else and yet seemingly complete in themselves. I remembered the song. I remembered the compound steadily emptying, though it wasn't until my father's words that I fully realized why only a few scattered civilian spouses and children were left behind, along with the occasional retired shinobi. I remember the first snowfall of the year, blanketing the world in white, and I remember sitting on the porch and gazing out at it with my mother and brother, like we were alone in a frozen world. Even though it was winter, I sat beneath an umbrella, keeping myself in the shade, even as I was bundled up in careful layers, trying to walk the fine line between keeping myself cool enough that the Rinkaichi wouldn't grow agitated, but warm enough that I wouldn't further harm my already weakened body. I remember different takes on that same scene, returning to it even as days passed, but it was only after perhaps half a dozen such days that I realized why. My mother and I were sewing clothes together, while looking out over the snow. Or really, my mother was sewing and I was watching with some interest. I like to think that I had enough sewing experience for anyone, Not only had I made my own costume and costumes for my team, but during my time with the Protectorate, I'd made spider silk costumes to supply teams all across America, with plenty of trial versions, replacements and spares. I was experienced with making clothes for countless body types in countless different styles and colors, and accounting for countless different purposes, and so my experiences went well beyond just what my power offered me. But baby clothes were, admittedly, a new one for me. Even in a paramilitary organization with loose entry conditions, it hadn't come up before. One had to account for the subtle but important differences that came with the expectation that the wearer wouldn't be dressing themselves, or have much coordination. Which was an interesting thought experiment, though seeing it done once was enough to get an idea for it. I'd have liked to follow along with my own bugs, just to help memorize the feeling. But in the wake of how I devastated their populations, I shied away from doing so. Right now I had my swarms focused solely on breeding, to restore their ranks. But even if my limitations frustrated me, it was nice. I was worried about my situation, worried about my health, worried about the future and so much more. But the quiet moments on that porch somehow still managed to be peaceful. Usually, my mother only sewed for about an hour a day before shutting the sliding doors, turning up the heat, and drowsing for a bit on her chair with Shino and I. My mother and brother were still recovering from their own experiences too, but I was comfortable in a way as well. I made a habit of checking both of them with my chakra, making sure they were fine, before following them into slumber. Except today, I was having a hard time sleeping. I wasn't sure what or why or even how, but something seemed off. Maybe it was just the compound. I doubted most people would describe the Abarame clan as exuberant, even at their most lively, but the compound still felt strange, being as empty as it was, especially since it was still a new place. Except that hadn't bothered me before. I checked my swarms instead, making sure nothing was wrong. I was still doing my best to recoup my losses, but thankfully, in the wake of the attack and with our change in location, a number of spaces had been carved out by the clan to help with restoring their hives, and my father and grandfather had built extras, with the intention of expanding now that they had more room. Since I was maintaining the Abarame's other swarms as a matter of course, they had set aside several for me as well, and this was something the Abarame clan was thankfully very experienced with. Large segmented rooms built like massive terrariums, with adjustable light, temperature and humidity for different sections, plenty of plant matter, and a steady supply of prey brought in from outside of Konoha. With some careful planning and adjustment, they made for ideal places to restore my flagging swarms, and things were progressing well across the clan thanks to my power. I could trigger my bugs' breeding instincts even out of season after all, and bypass their normal behavior. Many spiders, for example, would breed once and then stand guard over their XX. But I could have them move on, relying on other bugs for such maintenance while focusing on producing as many spiders as possible. Some populations, such as my beehives, were a bigger concern, because the worker population had been devastated. But the honey they'd already stocked up thankfully remained, ready to be fed to the next generation. I consolidated the remaining bees I had, organized them, and used other bugs to assist in tasks when manpower was short, and I'd asked my father and grandfather to prepare a glucose-sucrose mix to serve as a replacement for nectar during the winter, since getting food from flowers would be hard right now, along with other specialized feeds. With some luck, I might be able to resume production in the spring, although restoring the balance of the local ecosystem would take longer. Nothing seemed wrong there. Until the next generation was born, my swarm would sadly remain at reduced capacity, and more focused on maintenance and growth than security or improvement. But what bugs I'd been able to spare around the compound hadn't noticed anything wrong. I had tiny tripwires set around the area, and all the important ones remained untouched at least. Yet I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening. I checked myself next. I'd gotten into the habit of using my Higanbana to regularly take stock of my own condition and tend to it as best I could. But ironically, the thing that was hurting my body the most at this point was itself, rather than my Rinkaichu, although the latter needed careful maintenance throughout the day. Whenever my body cells noticed the foreign Rinkaichu, they released cytokines, Essentially biological alarms to tell my brain that the body was under attack and to prepare for war. To do that, it accelerated my metabolism, consumed enormous amount of calories to produce defenders against an attacker that wasn't doing anything, devouring and damaging itself in the process. Funny enough, it was my immune system that was tearing my body apart now, and the invaders that were repairing it. But I controlled bugs, not immune cells, so there was only so much I could do about that. I'd have to wait until my body learned, and until then, deal with the constant fevers, aches and pains. But allowing for the shit show that was my insides, nothing seemed particularly odd about that right now either. Expanding my range again, I worried for a while and then reached for one of my blocks, munching it quickly to paste. Even after I spit up a mask though, the anxious feeling didn't go away. I chewed up another and then another still. But all I got from it was 3 people to laugh at how odd I felt. Shh, I told them, annoyed. My mother and brother were sleeping after all, though they might have been getting used to this, because neither stirred. The mask quieted slightly, but kept laughing at me, and I thought about summoning my bugs to eat them, even though that had ended badly the last time. Wait, had it? I didn't remember what had happened. I decided to ignore them for the moment, trying to focus on the bigger issue. My grandfather was still here, so I reached out to him through his swarm.
Grandfather, something's wrong.
On the other side of the house, he turned his head, looking first in my general direction, then outside the house. After a moment, he slowly stood, using a cane along with his prosthetic foot, and gingerly moved through the house. I waited uneasily for him to arrive and checked my power again, just to be sure, but still found nothing. Ryuugi wanted to meet with me today, my grandfather said as he carefully entered the room, having to hold his cane with his elbow to free up his hand to open the door. He slowly made his way to an empty chair, lowering his voice to a whisper as he saw my mother and brother sleeping. Even though the words were barely audible, I could hear them through his swarm. His guards are snooping around to make sure everything's safe, but those punks sure have gotten sloppy. He took out a handkerchief and wiped his forehead. Though I guess their best are probably also outside the village, he added musingly a moment later. I relaxed, though only slightly. Then, was what set me off the feeling of someone I didn't know lurking about? But how, if I still couldn't sense them? That must have been outside my range, and my swarms were in such shambles I couldn't get a clear read on anyone's chakra. I was about to ask when my grandfather sighed again. He'll probably ask, so I guess I should too. My grandfather continued to whisper. Taura, if you don't remember with everything that's happened, no one will blame you, but... The Hokage said I told him about an attacker that night, the one who fought the fourth and who we suspect might have been controlling the QB. Do you remember anything about him?
Yes,
I said through his swarm, continuing our almost silent conversation, even as I filed that away.
but there's not much to say. Male, unless he was transformed, but he wore a mask, along with a long black cloak with a hood, and it was up when I saw him. His most distinguishing feature was that his mask only had a hole for his right eye.
Just his right eye, my grandfather murmured to himself. Then the left might be missing or blind, unless it's meant as a diversion. Anything else?
Average height.
I said after a moment of consideration.
The fourth was taller than him, but not massively so. Has some ability to teleport, and when I first saw him, he phased up through the rocks behind the fourth. When he was fully submerged, I couldn't sense him at all, but he must have been able to navigate through the earth somehow. I think he probably has some skill with space-time ninjutsu.
You're certain it was teleportation, not just accelerated movement?
Accelerated movement would have left a trail for the Kikaichu to follow. He didn't.
I said, and my grandfather nodded, so that must have been the right answer. That explains some things, he mused. Before we attack someone, we have to assume this masked man attacked some important people and managed to kill the first wife and an entire Ambu contingent, even though they were inside the highest level barrier the village could manage, without leaving so much as a trace of tampering when we went through it. Perhaps because he went around it instead. This was the first I'd heard about other targets, and I wondered how that played into the attack, but I assumed at least some of it was confidential information, so I didn't ask. I agreed with his thought process though. The same way even the strongest wall wouldn't keep out someone who could fly, even the strongest barrier wouldn't necessarily stop someone from teleporting through it, or potentially even phasing through it, depending on the mechanics of it. Anything else? My grandfather asked after a moment of silence. It can be anything at all. Even the smallest detail could prove to be important. And at that, I hesitated. Thought about it, stopped to reconsider, and then mulled it over again, questioning myself. It wasn't something I'd really thought of at the time, but thinking back to it and searching my memories for clues, there was one more thing, maybe, but even in my own mind, it was hard to explain.
I can't be sure, but I think he was younger than the fourth.
I said at last, hedging my guess in my uncertainty. The fourth was... My grandfather started before pausing himself, looking like he was trying to remember. A young man. In his early 20s, I think. You think the attacker was, what, 20 then?
I think he was a teenager.
I admitted.
He didn't sound like it, didn't even really look like it, but I think he was.
Hearing that, my grandfather stared at me, looking surprised. Why do you think that? He asked, and that was the part that was hard to explain. Usually, I could rely on my books to get a solid feel for people's rough ages, based on countless markers, from physical height and muscle mass to the scent of various pheromones and chemicals. But if I had any of those to serve as evidence, I wouldn't be hesitant right now. I'd only sensed the man briefly, and hadn't even really gotten a chance to feel him through my swarm. Worse, the man's scent and taste on the air had been weird. Part of it might have been like how Gru's power watched his scent regularly, but even what I could smell was bizarre somehow, to the point that I hesitated to even immediately label it as human, but also couldn't deny that it definitely was human. Was it how he spoke then? How he carried himself? Maybe partially, but I'd only seen him for a matter of seconds. Was it the dramatics, perhaps? That someone with the ability to sneak into the village completely undetected and, from what I'd seen and heard after the fact and was putting together now, summon the QB directly to him, had decided to do it at the edge of the village instead of, say, right on Okage's house or in the middle of the village. Possibly, but being overly dramatic wasn't something exclusive to being a teenager. Was it the vitality I'd sensed when I briefly felt his chakra from like a Kaichu? That kind of vitality didn't translate directly to being young though. The closest thing I had to a truly coherent argument was that between summoning the QB at the edge of the village and targeting the fourth, it felt like the masked man had something to prove. But even that was me working backwards from my certainty that he was young, rather than something that really proved it. But no, that wasn't why. If I had to put it into words, had to truly explain my thought processes, all I could say was that it was my professional opinion as someone with a PhD in teenage supervillainy and hands-on experience that this guy was a teenage supervillain. His voice had been deep, and if he was really as young as I expected, then he was tall for his age, and very strong. But when I thought back and remembered him, it made me think more of Gru than Armsmaster, or even maybe myself. Someone whose strength, certainty and presence wasn't a lie per se, but wasn't not a lie either. And I wasn't really sure how to explain that coherently to someone else either.
I don't know for sure,
I admitted.
It was just a feeling I got when I saw him.
You're telling me a teenager was able to control the QB and fight the Fofo Kage head-on? He asked skeptically, before pausing and taking another look at me, his baby granddaughter. I guess anything's possible. After that, we both lapsed into silence for a while, until I felt someone enter my range. A one-eyed teenager with a skill for space-time ninjutsu. The first Hokage repeated after my grandfather passed word on to him, but didn't sound as skeptical as I expected. I don't suppose it rings any bells? My grandfather asked. It rings a few, actually, but no one it applies to is still alive, the third said. For a moment, I thought he'd leave it at that, but he continued. If Danzo's suspicions are correct, there were plenty who could have once qualified. There was a time when they spent their eyes like coin, and the warring era produced more than a few with such skills, but all of them either fell in battle with the Senju clan or died of old age. Now, there are several who might one day have such skill, but none that should be capable of it now. My grandfather nodded slowly, seeming to pick up whatever was being left unsaid. Whatever clan this Danzo suspected, it was seemingly obvious to the both of them. Again there was a long pause, and again I thought it might be the end of it. I think my grandfather did too, but then the first turned to face him. What are your thoughts on the matter, Shiro? The third asked then, and I could feel my grandfather's surprise in the motions of his body, try as he might to hide it. I think... My grandfather began slowly, seemingly gathering his thoughts. That it would be arrogant of us to assume that all the Uchiha are inside the village. Madara left the village for years before returning. He would have had plenty of time to leave behind a child if he so desires, and time enough has passed for that child to leave more behind in turn. Even if there is reason to suspect the Sharingan is involved, we can't necessarily assume Konoha has a monopoly over the Sharingan, so blaming our allies for the matter without clear evidence is foolhardy. We already know of at least one Uchiha who opposed the village, knew how to control the QB and would have had time to pass his knowledge and bloodline along. Personally, I'd speak to their head on the matter openly, as a gesture of trust, and ask for his cooperation in determining what this masked man might be capable of, and how to defend against him. At the very least, I'd rather blame an existing enemy and later find out I'm wrong, than ostracize my allies during a time of need, and find myself abandoned by them in the coming storm. Besides, I think we both know that an open hand is a better way to root out corruption and guilt than a closed fist. The third Hokage hummed, smoking his pipe for a while before nodding. I'm inclined to agree, he replied. The Uchiha have never practiced anything like the Hyuga seal, and so who's to say that every member and pair of eyes is accounted for to begin with? Kakashi has proved such transplants are possible, and if you consider it in that light, the range of suspects grows tremendously. I think it's rather premature to accuse our allies of the attack until more details can be found. But there are few things people fear more than the unknown, Shinobi in particular. Oh, we often like to pretend that we're above such fears, but it strikes hardest at those who believe themselves the most knowledgeable. It's entirely logically sound that there might be more Uchiha out there, or eyes unaccounted for. But without evidence, people will prefer to hate something they know exists than believe in something they're unsure of and let themselves fear it. Right now, all we have is corpses, to prove a threat exists, but not its nature. That will be harder to get, especially if the attacker truly specializes in space-time jutsu, Grandfather said. And people will wonder how such a threat could have existed without us knowing about it, as if 100 things don't happen every day that we're unaware of, even in our own village. Grandfather stopped then, pursing his lips. But I suppose I'm a hypocrite, because even I wonder how such a powerful figure could have existed without making a splash. Unless he has, the third replied. It'd be easy enough if it occurred far away from us or behind another village's walls. Surely, the other villages must have wondered where we found Minato once the Third War came. but he simply grew up where they could not see, and we did our best to make sure none of them ever found out about it. My grandfather frowned then and grumbled. And we're not in much of a position to ask questions or make demands right now, are we? He asked. If anyone else has heard of this man, I'm guessing they'll keep it to themselves and hope it costs us even more than it already has. In a sense, that's what brought me here today, Shiro. Though I do, of course, appreciate your recollection. The third said as my grandfather gave him his full attention. I said before that I'd like to speak with you regarding that cloth that saved your life at a better time. Spider silk, I believe you said it was. I would like to discuss that matter today, as your family seems to have stabilized. Of course, Grandfather said, doing his best to hide the way his back muscles tensed. The Aburame clan was famed for wearing layers, and so he might even have succeeded. It's all thanks to a recent breakthrough in the clan's jutsu development, although I won't lie and say that the QB attack hasn't set us back. A new secret technique? The first asked, absently toying with his pipe, though his eyes never left my grandfather. Yes, we call it Kumonosujo, Grandfather said, pausing for just a moment before pushing through, as if to trample that moment down. I filed away the name, just so we'd have our story straight if it ever came up. The Spiderweb Castle. A pretty grandiose name for me just wearing my spider silk all day, but I didn't hate it. It's allowed us to bridge that gap from controlling the Kikaichi to controlling certain types of spiders. Sadly, more than a few died in the attack. The clothes Shibe and I wore were a kind of proof of concept for incorporating them into the clan's arsenal. The third nodded, expression entirely unchanged. Wonderful, he said. I, for one, am convinced. This silk could save a lot of lives if you can use it properly, and I seek to. How so, Hokage-sama? Grandfather asked. I would like to equip every shinobi in Konoha with it, he replied, and my grandfather couldn't hide his wince. I wondered briefly if the Hokage had seen through his excuses, or simply didn't care. When you're weak, the appearance of strength is a vital thing, but the cost of appearing strong is often steep and risks weakening you further. To prove our strength, most of the villages run on constant missions, using their continued, even improved service to show the world we haven't faltered. But running more missions inevitably means facing more danger in turn, and often while more worn down than normal. It is a sadly accepted fact that this deception will have casualties, with each loss cutting away a branch of Konoha's future and adding yet further burden to those who remain. But sometimes, a simple thing can change the direction of fate. I can't promise that we'll live up to your expectations, Grandfather hedged. Of course, but I think it will, the Hokage continued. In the field, the greatest losses are borne by genin and chunin, and the most common cause of death is the kunai. It doesn't need to stop everything, Shiro. It just has to stop a simple knife. The people who meet Konoha shinobi in the field aren't going to know or care about the specifics, especially not the civilians watching and spreading rumors. They're just going to see kunai fail to penetrate, see shinobi that should have died get up and walk away, and make their own assumptions. And that's what we need right now. Fewer casualties and the image and reputation that comes with it. I want rumors to spread of how tough Konoha shinobi are, about how they can survive things no one else can, and I think your silk is the perfect start to it. So, can you prepare more? Yes, I thought. I could feel my body getting tired from the effort of staying awake, but my mind was sharp and alert, even eager. This was something I could do, to help the family I couldn't otherwise protect. It was something I was ideally suited for and had even made preparations to do, now offered to me on a silver platter. I could do it. I wanted to do it. It may take some time, Hokage-sama. As I said, the attack didn't leave us room to hold back. Grandfather answered, clearly wary. How long? The Hokage asked calmly. I ran the numbers. My original costume had taken me about 2 months to make, but it had also been a learning experience and I'd been working alone, starting from nothing. I'd had to figure everything out from scratch and I'd made mistakes that I'd had to correct too. The second batch had taken around the same amount of time, but the circumstances had been different. Brian and Lisa had asked me about making them costumes in April, I think? Around when we faced Bakuda, I was pretty sure. I'd been reluctant at the time, even hesitant. I'd been uncertain about what my place in the world was and if I wanted to so directly support a group of villains. And then everything had gone to hell too. The AVB had gone on a rampage, and later so had Empire 88. Then Leviathan had attacked, wrecking the city and everyone's lives and plans for it. By the middle of May, I'd been living in a different world for all intents and purposes. And when June had rolled around, it had brought with it the 9. In truth, it had taken me a fair bit less than a month to make 5 more costumes. I'd cobbled together imps in maybe 2 weeks as my second biggest project, and with the Protectorate, I wasn't even sure. I'd made something like 4,000 costumes in about 3 years, while working a job and spending time in jail. Now, as a baby, I had almost literally nothing better to do in a day, except sleep and be sick. The only limiting factor was the number of spiders I had left, but there were enough to begin the process, and once the next generation hatched, I'd have a decent population again and I'd be back in business. I could have a proof of concept ready in 2 weeks, tops, unless I got really sick. Using my bugs, I made my presence known at the tips of my grandfather's fingers, marking 7 of them before pausing and doing it again. 14, he seemed to understand. He did not, however, seem enthused. I'll have something ready in a month, he promised instead, albeit reluctantly. I will do my best to live up to your expectations, Okage-sama. Of course, I won't ask you to do it for free, especially given the sacrifices you've already made. Although, given the village's circumstances, I would take it as a personal favor to keep the price relatively affordable, within the budget afforded by those running C-rank missions, at least. Of course, my grandfather said, still not seeming impressed. I wasn't bothered by the offer though. I'd first offered to make a costume for Brian for $2,000, though granted it wasn't as though I truly cared about the money. From my understanding of this world's currency, Ryuugi, a C-rank mission was probably paid in the realm of $3,000 to $10,000, so I was fairly content with that. I suspected my grandfather was annoyed at the price, but if it helped minimize casualties and kept the war from breaking out, I would have done it for much less than that. On the other hand, I had a family to take care of now, and if the clan had more money, they'd be able to better prepare themselves for missions too. After thinking it through, I decided to leave the price as it is. The remainder of the debt I'll find another way to repay, the Hokage said. Am I correct in assuming that the creator of the technique is Earth Natures? I have some skill in that regard, yes, Hokage-sama, grandfather said. A fascinating element, isn't it? Saratobi Hiruzen asked. Most shinobi consider Earth's power to lay in its defensive capabilities, but I disagree. I've always found its versatility to be its greatest asset, encompassing the range of earthen materials and a transformation from one state into another. Why, even the gravity of materials can be manipulated with earth release. The Jujikage quite enjoys using that skill to fly. Such is the range of a single nature. Through my unique perspective on my grandfather's anatomy, I felt his expression briefly twist into something horrified before smoothing. I'm afraid I don't see how that's relevant, Okage-sama. I'm simply musing that it's never too late to learn something new, Shiru, the third said. Several scrolls of middling value were included in Iwa's reparations after the war, but we have relatively few earth-natured shinobi who could learn them. I thought it might be of use to you, given the injuries you sustained, to make things lighter or perhaps even cause them to float. Perhaps you can use this time to revisit the basics again. You've taken the paper test, have you not? Then you must have seen it crumble. And indeed, the secret to earth release is to separate your chakra into different pieces, and then reassemble it into different form. I remember, Hokage-sama, grandfather said, and in that moment his voice was almost sharp. From how my grandfather stood, I knew the two men had locked eyes, but for a while both were silent. I couldn't tell what passed between them, but neither backed down. 2 years, the Hokage said, voice completely calm. All we need to do is hold out for 2 years, long enough to convince everyone that we didn't suffer as much as they think, that we're strong, even though the fourth Hokage and the Sannin are gone. But it'll be hard, Shiru. People say that the war is over, but the other villages still test our borders. But we have a chance. Iwa suffered the most losses in the war, and Kiri is doing nearly as bad to themselves as anyone's ever done to them. All we need to do is bring Kumo to the table, and the moment the other villages see them stand down, the war will truly end. Our children and grandchildren will have time to grow up in peace if we just hold out for 2 years. My grandfather didn't answer, didn't even move. I could tell he was holding his breath, but not why. Slowly, the third nodded and turned slightly, breaking eye contact in a way that seemed almost polite. Think over what I said, Shiru. It's a useful trick, and you're never too old or too young to learn, the Hokage said. Thank you again for your advice. I hope to hear from you again soon.